My son told me, "Rest well tonight, Mama," and forgot to hang up the phone. What I heard after made my knees buckle, and my heart nearly stop. A woman's voice whispered, "She won't remember a thing after the drops. The medicine is working faster than we thought." Then a man's voice followed, cold and calculating, "Good. Once she's completely disoriented, we'll have her sign everything. The house, the savings, the land. It'll all be ours." My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 79 years old, and in that moment, standing in my small living room with the lace curtains swaying in the evening breeze, I realized the headaches, the dizziness, the sudden lapses in memory weren't caused by age at all. I wasn't losing my mind naturally, I was being drugged, and the people behind it were none other than my own son Marcus and his wife Denise. The evening had started just like any other. I had poured myself a cup of chamomile tea in the kitchen with its pale yellow walls, the same walls my late husband Harold painted with such care decades ago. Sunlight still clung to the photographs framed along the hallway. Family portraits of birthdays, school graduations, church picnics, moments I once cherished, now shadowed by betrayal. Marcus had called earlier that day, asking if I had taken the memory support drops Denise had given me. He said they were recommended by a specialist she knew from her work at a health clinic. "They'll keep you sharp, Mama," he insisted with that charming tone that once reassured me. But every time I took them, confusion crept in like fog. I would misplace bills, forget which pot was boiling, or wander into a room with no recollection of why I'd gone there. At first, I believed them. I thought it was simply the burden of age. But hearing their voices on that accidental call shattered that illusion. My own flesh and blood was orchestrating a scheme to make me powerless, to strip away everything Harold and I had sacrificed for. I sank into the old armchair by the window, clutching the phone, replaying their words in my mind. My son, my only son, the child I raised while working double shifts as a seamstress, the boy whose laughter once filled this very house, was conspiring to erase me while I was still alive. The betrayal burned hotter than any illness ever could. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage. I realized then that I wasn't facing a natural decline of age. I was facing an attack, a deliberate one. I pressed my palms against my knees, whispering to myself, "Not me, not like this. They may think I am old and fragile, but they will learn that I have lived too long, worked too hard, and endured too much to be broken now." For the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear, sharper than the edge of a blade, and with that clarity came a decision. If Marcus and Denise wanted to play with poison and deceit, I was going to show them just how dangerous a 79-year-old woman can be when pushed into a corner. I sat there in the fading light of my living room. The hum of the refrigerator in the distance, the only sound besides the thudding of my heart. My mind traveled back to the last few months, replaying every detail with fresh eyes now that I understood what was really happening. The memory drops, Denise had called them, little brown bottles with handwritten labels she swore came from a holistic practitioner she knew. She said they were natural, made from herbs, good for clarity. But every time I swallowed them, a fog would settle over me so thick I could hardly find my way out. I would forget where I put my keys, misplace entire stacks of letters, sometimes even lose my balance walking down the hall. Marcus and Denise would shake their heads sympathetically, pat my hand, and tell me this was normal at my age. They had even started bringing up how difficult it might be for me to handle bills and taxes alone. At the time, I thought they were simply worried, but now I could see their plan laid bare. They were crafting a story, one where I was the helpless old woman, too frail to think for myself, ripe for them to swoop in and take control of everything Harold and I had built. I rose from the armchair and walked slowly toward my bedroom, my bare feet brushing against the cool wooden floor. Inside the dresser, hidden beneath layers of old scarves, was my small notebook, the one I had been keeping for years. In it were dates, times, little notes I scribbled when something unusual happened. At first, they were harmless reminders. December 10th, misplaced glasses. Found them in pantry. But as time passed, the notes became darker. January 6th, Couldn't remember name of pastor's wife during service. January 14th. Left pot boiling until water burned away. February 2nd. Marcus suggested I let him handle my checkbook. Reading those words now, I realized every single episode had happened within hours of me taking those drops. And on days when I skipped them, on days when I simply forgot to swallow the bitter liquid, I had been fine. I felt almost foolish for not piecing it together sooner, but betrayal from your own blood blinds you. You don't suspect malice when you've built your whole life on trust and love. I pressed the notebook against my chest, the pages fluttering like a frightened bird. I needed to tell someone, but who? Family was out of the question. My siblings had long passed, and cousins were scattered far away, barely in touch. I thought of my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a retired librarian with sharp eyes and a soft voice, the kind of woman who always noticed when something was wrong. She had lived across the street for over 40 years, and she was the only person I knew I could lean on. If I confided in her, maybe she could help me figure out what to do. The next morning, after a restless night spent staring at the ceiling fan turning endlessly above me, I called her. My voice shook, but I spoke with urgency. Clara, it's Evelyn. I need you to come over right away. And please, don't let Marcus or Denise see you. She didn't ask questions. She just said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. When she arrived, I led her to the kitchen and closed the door behind us. She gasped when she saw my face. Evelyn, you look like you've seen a ghost. I sat her down at the table and poured out everything: the overheard phone call, the memory drops, the notebook of incidents, the way Marcus and Denise had been circling me like vultures. Clara's eyes widened with every detail, her lips pressed tight until she finally spoke. This isn't just wrong, Evelyn. This is elder abuse. It's criminal. Hearing her say the word criminal made it feel heavier, more real. I wasn't just imagining things. I wasn't paranoid. I was being slowly erased by people who should have been protecting me. I showed her the little brown bottle of drops, still half full. She turned it in her hands, sniffed the liquid, and frowned. This doesn't smell like anything natural I've ever known. We should get this tested. I nodded, but deep inside, a thought was already forming. Going to the authorities now would mean walking into a courtroom where it was my word against theirs. They had been building the case that I was forgetful, unreliable, losing touch with reality. Who would believe me? No, I couldn't rush. I had to be smarter than them, more patient, more cunning. Clara squeezed my hand. So what are you going to do? Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched mine, waiting. I took a deep breath, staring at the old lace curtains, swaying in the window as if Harold himself were reminding me of the strength we'd always shared. I'm going to let them think their plan is working, I said slowly. I'll pretend to take their drops, act confused, stumble on my words. But all the while, I'll be documenting every visit, every lie, every attempt to manipulate me. And when the time is right, I'll be ready to expose them for exactly what they are. My voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger, louder, filled with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the hunter, and they didn't even know it yet. I learned fast how to turn their certainty against them. The very next morning, I began the performance. I dressed in the cardigan Marcus loved, the one with the faded buttons Harold used to joke about, and I practiced that gentle, forgetful smile in the mirror until it felt natural. When Denise knocked on my door with that syrupy concern and the little brown bottle, I let my shoulders sag and my eyes cloud just enough to make them believe I was back where they wanted me, helpless and malleable. I took the bottle from her with trembling hands, tipped a dropper as if into my mouth. Then, when their backs were turned, I discreetly spilled the contents into the sink. I learned to keep the moves small and ordinary. A cough, a search for non-existent glasses, a softened voice whenever Marcus asked about bills. But while I gave them the illusion of control, I was sharp as a tack, watching, listening, cataloging every phrase, every glance, every half-lie that slipped out between their practiced lines. I started to bring my little notebook with me everywhere. I thought of something, a phrase they used. The date, a visit turned strangely insistent. The time when Denise suggested I let younger hands manage those numbers. I also hid a small voice recorder in the hollow of a candle on my living room mantel. It was an old thing Clara had given me. She said it was for lectures once, but I used it to catch the casual cruelties and the scheming whispers that flew when they thought I wasn't listening. I learned the rhythm of their deceit. Marcus would arrive with pleasant conversation and then, like clockwork, steer the talk to my safety joint accounts, signed forms, legal guardianship. Denise would flatter me with meals, but drop a comment about how difficult banks were for people of our age. How nice it would be if someone else took care of that paperwork. The plan they had fashioned was clumsy in its cruelty, but elegant in its intent. Wear me down with confusion until I looked incapable, then present the papers and the law as saviors. I needed allies beyond Clara. I needed someone who knew the banking ropes, but who would not alarm the vultures. Clara had a cousin, Samuel, who worked at the community credit union down on Elm Street. He was not flashy, he wore sensible shoes and kept his shirts buttoned to the top, but he knew how to move money quietly and how to create a paper trail that only a determined thief would be able to untangle. One afternoon, when Marcus and Denise were at church, I walked to the credit union with a small envelope tucked into the lining of my coat. Samuel met me in a corner of the lobby, away from the teller windows, and listened while I explained, choking sometimes on the words. He asked few questions. Instead, he offered practical solutions. "We can open an account under your maiden name with a small trust attached," he suggested softly. "Or we can arrange for a series of cashier's checks to be held in a numbered safe deposit box until you decide what to do." I chose a plan that would confuse anyone who tried to pry. Several modest transfers spread across different days, each one small enough to seem ordinary, moved into accounts with legal variations of my name and a trust that named Clara as a temporary contact in case of emergency. We left a tiny amount in the old accounts to keep automatic payments functioning, not enough to set a thief, but enough to keep the paperwork from raising alarms. While Samuel handled the banking, I sharpened my theater at home. I practiced forgetting names, losing the thread of stories, fumbling with envelopes. I let them see me confused when the camera was off. But when the camera was on, the little recorder tucked into the mantel, I was a different person. Attentive, precise, cataloging evidence. Their greed made them reckless. Denise began asking pointed questions about where I kept important papers. Marcus walked through my house with a predatory calm, commenting on paintings, on the sturdiness of the roof, on how icily the house could be resold. Each comment was a brick in the case I was building. I had to stay 2 steps ahead, feigning frailty, while quietly assembling proof, pretending ignorance, while Samuel moved pieces of my life into safer places. It was exhausting, but every exhausted breath tasted like progress. The days blurred into one another. Yet I kept myself anchored by routine, the very routines they thought were slipping from me. Each morning I brewed chicory coffee, the same way Harold liked it, and I let the aroma settle into the rooms like a memory of stability. I would place the little brown bottle of drops neatly by the teacup, so when Denise came in, she saw it right where she expected. I would tilt the dropper and smile faintly, let the liquid touch my lips, then discreetly press a napkin to my mouth as if dabbing away a spill. She never looked twice, so certain of her control that she couldn't imagine I was playing her game better than she played mine. Marcus, meanwhile, was growing bolder. One evening he arrived with a slim briefcase and papers clipped together, his voice rehearsed to sound casual. "Mama," he said, "these are just for your safety. Simple documents, nothing scary. They'd let me take care of bills and the house if you got sick suddenly. You wouldn't want strangers making decisions for you." I let my hands tremble as I reached for the pen, nodding as though the words soothed me. But inside, fury and clarity roared like a fire. I scribbled my name where he pointed, knowing full well the accounts he believed he was gaining access to had already been drained and shifted elsewhere with Samuel's help. The ink on the page meant nothing. The paper was a hollow crown. That night, Clara sat with me in the kitchen. the light buzzing overhead as she read through the copies Marcus had forgotten to take. She shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a line. "They're giving themselves power of attorney," she said. "They could sell your house out from under you. They could even make medical choices in your name." Her voice carried disbelief, but I felt nothing except a cold certainty. "Let them think they have it," I answered. "When they march to the bank expecting to rule, they'll find nothing but dust. And when they reach for my home, I'll already have allies ready to prove what they've done." To keep my act convincing, I sprinkled in errors that made them smile with satisfaction. I once forgot the name of Marcus's high school. Another time I pretended I couldn't recall the year Harold passed. Denise looked at Marcus with triumphant eyes each time, certain they were breaking me down faster than age ever could. What they didn't see was the careful ledger I kept hidden behind the lining of my jewelry box. In it, I wrote, May 3rd, Marcus presented legal documents. May 6th, Denise reminded me twice about the drops, insisted I take them in front of her. May 12th, overheard them whispering in kitchen about selling house before winter. Each line was a nail in the coffin of their scheme. It wasn't only the evidence I was gathering that strengthened me, but also the memories that surged back in quiet moments. I would sit on the porch at dusk, watching the magnolia tree Harold planted the year Marcus was born, and I would remind myself of the decades of labor, sacrifice, and resilience that built this life. I scrubbed floors for years, sewed clothes for neighbors, sold homemade pies at church bazaars, all to pay for Marcus's education, all to make sure he never went hungry. And now, here he was, scheming to strip it all away. The betrayal ran deep, but so did my resolve. I began to plan for the inevitable confrontation. Clara suggested going to the police immediately, but I shook my head. If we walk in now, they'll twist it. They'll say I'm paranoid, confused, that I imagined the phone call. But if we wait until they expose themselves, until they try to act on those papers, we'll have more than suspicion. We'll have evidence of intent. Clara sighed but agreed, her eyes gleaming with reluctant admiration. "Evelyn, you're braver than most folks half your age," she said softly. In those days, I discovered a power I didn't know remained in me. Old age had not made me weak. It had made me cunning, patient, deliberate. They thought they were hunting me, but I had already built the trap, and soon enough they would walk straight into it. I let the performance ripen like fruit on a high branch, patient and steady, never rushing the harvest they believed was theirs. The morning Marcus marched in with that self-satisfied swagger, and Denise hovered behind him with a clipboard and a casserole. I offered the tired smile they'd come to expect, and set the little brown bottle on the table like a prop in a play. "Take your drops, Mama," she cooed, and I let the bitter sting touch my tongue before the napkin kissed it away. Then I asked the question they were dying to hear, soft and shaky, "Will those papers make things easier for you too?" Marcus squeezed my shoulder, the gesture rehearsed and hollow. "For all of us," he said, as if mercy lived in his mouth. Inside, I marked the time, the angle of his eyes, the exact words he chose. Outside, I signed one more confirmation. He slid forward, careful to keep my handwriting neat enough to be admissible and weary enough to be plausible. That afternoon, after they left, I set the next snare. I placed a decoy envelope in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, labeled in my careful script, "Insurance payouts, house and land." Inside, I tucked photocopies of old policies with the dollar amounts obscured, and a typed list of locations of valuables that pointed to drawers that held nothing but hymnals and winter socks. On the top corner of the chest, barely visible against the grain, I fastened the smallest doorbell camera Clara's nephew had installed the week prior, its field of view capturing anyone who lifted the lid, their hands, their faces, their greed. In the pantry, behind the flour bin, I placed a second decoy, a metal tin marked funeral fund, and beneath the sink, a third envelope stamped safety deposit box keys. Each was a story they already wanted to believe, a nervous elder hiding cash in obvious places, ripe for rescue. Meanwhile, the real documents slept in a weatherproof satchel under the floorboard of the back porch. The plank that creaks on the second nail from the steps, wrapped in Harold's old work shirt like a blessing. At the credit union, Samuel and I choreographed one last movement, a scheduled transfer of modest utility amounts to continue flowing from the old account so the account wouldn't shudder, and a distinct alert if any unusual withdrawal was attempted in person. He also connected me with a woman named Patrice, at the legal aid clinic Silver Braids. Clear voice who explained, without drama, how a forged need for guardianship could be unraveled if I documented coercion, misrepresentation, or chemical impairment. "You are building a timeline," she said, tapping my notebook with a pen. "A story the law can read." I left with copies of pamphlets and a direct number tucked into my purse next to a peppermint. The next day, church bells carried across the neighborhood, while Marcus texted me a time to review monthly bills. I brewed chicory, set out 2 chipped mugs, and let the front door sit on its latch so the hallway recorder would catch their entry. Denise arrived first, alone, scanning the living room with the cool hunger of a buyer at an estate sale. "Where do you keep your life insurance, Miss Evelyn?" she asked, her voice dipping into professional concern. "Oh, child, I don't rightly recall," I murmured, glancing vaguely toward the bedroom. She didn't wait for permission. I counted 10 seconds before the cedar lid lifted and the tiny camera blinked its patient eye. Moments later Marcus joined, and the two of them moved through my house as if my breath didn't live there. Rifling, peeking behind frames, testing the backs of drawers with their fingers. I kept my hands wrapped around the warm cup and let my face drift into that soft, wounded fog they craved, but inside I was steel. When they circled back, Marcus's tone sharpened. "Mama, to keep you safe, we'll need to relocate anything valuable," he said, palming the decoy funeral fund tin as if doing me a favor. Denise added, "We'll lock it up at our place until your paperwork finalizes." I nodded slowly, my voice a whisper of gratitude. "You two always know best." They left with the tin and a copy of the locations list that pointed nowhere that mattered. Confident they had plucked the fruit, unaware they'd only swallowed seeds. That evening, Clara and I reviewed the footage at her dining table, the lamp throwing a soft pool of light over our proof. We watched their hands open my chest. We heard their voices catalog my possessions. We saw their faces focused, greedy, unashamed. I slipped the audio recorder from the mantel and pressed play on a fresh hour of conversation where Marcus rehearsed how confused I'd sounded signing, where Denise said, "Once we get the deed moved, we can list before the first frost." I copied everything to 2 flash drives, one hidden in the hollow of my Bible's worn spine, the other sealed in an envelope addressed to Patrice with a note, "Mail if anything happens to me." Then I stood on the back porch, the summer air warm against my scalp, and breathed in the scent of magnolia and cut grass. I was tired, yes, but not from fear, from victory deferred. The net was almost ready, and all I needed now was their final lunge, bold, public, irreversible, so that when the trap closed it would do so in front of witnesses who could not pretend they saw nothing. I whispered into the dusk, to Harold, to every woman who ever stitched safety out of thin thread, "I'm nearly there." 2 mornings later, I set the table for 3, as if preparing a quiet breakfast, but what I was really laying out was a stage where truth could walk in on its own 2 feet. The first plate was mine, the second was for Marcus and his clipboard smile, and the third, placed as naturally as salt and pepper, was for a witness who would not announce herself until the right second. Before sunrise I'd called Patrice from the legal aid clinic and told her I expected company around noon. She reminded me to keep my voice recorder running, to ask clarifying questions in plain language, and, if possible, to have an unrelated adult present. I had also sent a message to Dr. Yvonne Sinclair, a chemistry instructor at the community college where Clara volunteers at the library. Yvonne agreed to test a few drops from the brown bottle and, more importantly, to write a neutral note describing what she received, from whom, and when. "Chain of custody," she said. I repeated the phrase until it felt like armor. By 9, Clara was in my kitchen arranging a vase of crepe myrtle as camouflage. At 10, we sealed a small vial of the liquid, labeled it with the date, and Clara walked it down to Yvonne's mailbox at the campus lab. snapping a photo of the handoff through the slot. At 11, I tucked my notebook, my phone, and a spare flash drive into the breadbox. No one ever suspects the breadbox, and I took my seat in the same cardigan I'd worn the first night of their plot, a talisman of continuity for a woman they believed was forgetting everything. They arrived early, Denise first, with her practical smile and a tote bag heavy with file folders. Then Marcus with a notary public whose commission seal shone like a badge of legitimacy. The notary, a soft-spoken woman in a navy blazer, introduced herself as Carla and asked if I preferred to read or have documents summarized. I took my time answering, letting the question hang long enough for both recorder's mantle and pocket to catch Marcus's impatience. I asked for summaries in words a grandmother could explain to a grandchild, then requested water. When I returned with glasses, Clara was at the door with a pie and a polite apology for interrupting. I promised Evelyn I'd stop by, she said, waving at the notary as if this were any other Thursday. Marcus stiffened, but Carla nodded. A witness was a witness, and she was bound to the formalities she carried in that wallet-sized stamp. I folded my hands and listened as Marcus read paragraphs about durable authority, management of assets, and the power to transfer property in my best interest. I widened my eyes at each phrase, then repeated them back carefully, almost childlike, asking, "So this means you could sign for me, even if I say I don't want to sell?" Denise rushed in with a sugar-coated answer. Carla corrected her gently, clarifying that consent and capacity mattered. The correction pricked Marcus's pride. He pivoted to the mortgage, then to securing valuables and simplifying accounts. I nodded, asked him to show me where my money would be seen, and watched his mouth falter when the online balance he expected wasn't there. There it was, the first crack. He masked it quickly, claiming the bank's system must be lagging, and moved to the next stack. Beneficiary updates, healthcare proxies, a temporary guardianship in case of sudden decline. I let my voice wobble. "Will those drops you gave me keep me from declining?" The room cooled. Denise said, "They're just vitamins." I asked what vitamins. I asked who prescribed them. I asked if we could call that practitioner together so I could say thank you on speaker. She stammered, then pivoted to privacy, then offered to bring the bottle to the table and check the name later. I smiled and slid my bread box closer to my elbow. Clara coughed softly. The cue we'd decided meant the camera is hungry. Carla, the notary, to her credit, kept her face neutral, but even neutrality has an angle. She angled it toward me. That was when I made my mistake. I reached for the wrong pen, knocked it, and let it roll deliberately to the floor so that when I bent to pick it up my cardigan shifted and my recorder's red light blinked in my periphery. "Lord, I'm sorry," I said sweetly. "I'm clumsy these days." Then I asked Marcus to read aloud the clause about property transfer one more time, and when he did, slow and clear, I said, "So if I change my mind later, you could still sell?" He said yes too quickly, too confidently, and Carla raised a palm. "Only with her capacity in question and proper evaluations," she corrected. Denise exhaled audibly. Marcus clicked his pen. The choreography was working, their certainty stepping on its own toes. The notary's caution keeping tempo, my questions building a steady drumbeat of intent on record. Before they left, Marcus insisted we go to the bank together tomorrow to fix the login, and I agreed with a grateful pat to his wrist. After they were gone, Clara and I reviewed the fresh audio until my eyes watered, then labeled the file and uploaded a copy to Patricia's secure link. I stood in the doorway and watched the streetlights bloom one by one, and I understood that the final lunge would come not in whispers but under fluorescent bulbs and security cameras, where policies were thicker than lies. I pressed my palm to the doorframe Harold sanded decades ago and told the wood what I would tell a jury if asked. I am not confused. I am patient. I am ready. The following morning carried with it a charged stillness, the kind that hangs before a storm. I dressed deliberately, buttoning my best navy blouse, pressing my skirt flat against my knees, and sliding on the pearl earrings Harold once gave me for our 30th anniversary. If they thought me fragile, they would now see someone steady, someone who belonged in a bank just as much as any suited customer. Clara insisted on accompanying me, though she promised to sit a few rows back in the lobby, reading her newspaper like any other retiree waiting on her turn. I tucked my recorder into my purse, making sure its small red light blinked to life before snapping the clasp shut. By the time Marcus's car pulled up, I had already rehearsed every line I needed to say, every question that would draw their greed into the open. Inside the bank, the air smelled faintly of ink and polished counters. Marcus walked beside me with that strained smile, Denise trailing close, carrying the tote that now bulged with folders. He greeted the receptionist as though he were already master of my accounts, requesting a private room for family estate matters. The young teller led us to a glass-walled cubicle where the hum of printers and distant chatter would serve as unknowing witnesses. A manager named Mr. Alvarez soon joined us, a tall man with calm eyes and a neat tie. "How can I help today?" he asked, settling into the seat opposite us. Marcus leaned forward eagerly, sliding the paperwork across. "We're here to update my mother's accounts under the durable power she's granted me. We'll need full access permissions." His voice brimmed with false confidence, but I noticed a twitch in his jaw. Mr. Alvarez scanned the forms, flipping pages with practiced precision. "I see signatures." "Yes," he said slowly, "but before we make changes of this magnitude, we must verify with Mrs. Carter herself." He looked directly at me, not at Marcus, not at Denise. That simple act of respect nearly broke me with relief. I steadied my breath, nodded, and leaned closer. "Sir," I said in a clear voice, "I would like you to read every line aloud and explain what authority it grants, slowly, so I may understand." Marcus interrupted, waving his hand. "It's standard. She doesn't need," but Mr. Alvarez raised a brow and continued. As he read, my part began. I asked questions in the same innocent cadence I'd practiced at home. "So this means my son could sell my house without my agreement?" Mr. Alvarez paused. "Not exactly. It requires medical evaluation of capacity, but these clauses are broad. They do raise concern." Denise's face paled. Marcus leaned in sharply, his voice rising. "She already agreed. She signed." I let my eyes widen, turning to Mr. Alvarez, recorder humming in my purse. But what if I never wanted them to sell? What if I only thought this was for paying my light bill? The manager frowned. "That would be misrepresentation, ma'am. You should never be misled in signing." Marcus's facade cracked. His voice dropped to a hiss, meant for me alone, but caught by the tiny microphone. "Mama, stop this nonsense. You gave us control. Don't embarrass yourself." Denise tried to soften it, resting her hand on mine, whispering, "It's for your protection." I pulled my hand back slowly, letting the gesture linger in the glass reflection, where Clara, outside, could see it. Mr. Alvarez tapped his keyboard, frowning deeper. "Mrs. Carter, your current accounts are nearly empty. Were you aware?" His tone was neutral, but the words fell like stones. Marcus's head whipped toward me, fury flaring. "Where's the money?" he demanded, too loud, heads turning outside the cubicle. Denise tugged at his sleeve, muttering, "Not here, Marcus, not here." I tilted my head, giving him the foggy smile he expected. "Money, oh child, I only ever had enough to cover groceries and church offerings." The lie tasted sweet. Mr. Alvarez closed the folder firmly. "Without clarity, we cannot proceed today. I recommend legal counsel for Mrs. Carter before any authority is granted." His tone carried finality. Marcus sputtered, "You don't understand. She's confused. She needs us." But Alvarez shook his head, meeting my gaze again. "She seems very clear to me." The meeting ended there, though Marcus tried to linger, whispering threats masked as concerns. "You'll regret this," he muttered as he guided Denise out. Clara folded her newspaper, rose, and joined me silently, her steady arm guiding me toward the sunlight outside. In that moment, I knew the tide had shifted. They were cornered, their frustration naked, their scheme exposed before a witness who wore a manager's tie and carried a bank's authority. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, Notebook open and recorder playing back every word. I wrote a single line across the top of the page. The storm has broken. Now the flood will carry them where they cannot return. The fury in Marcus's eyes that day at the bank was not something I would soon forget. It followed me home like a shadow, sharper and heavier than the late summer heat pressing against the windowpane. I knew that men like my son, men whose greed had grown fatter than their conscience, would not simply retreat after one failed attempt. They would come back, angrier, more desperate, more willing to strip away even the mask of civility they had worn for months. Clara urged me to lock the doors and call the police, but I reminded her gently, what I need is not only protection, but proof so strong they cannot wiggle free. She sighed, worry etched across her face, but stayed close all the same. That evening she slept in my guest room, her presence steadying me as the house creaked and settled in the night. The next morning brought the storm I expected. Marcus and Denise arrived without calling, without knocking, their car screeching to a halt in my driveway. I was at the kitchen table when the front door slammed open, the sound rattling the family photos that lined the hallway. "Where is it?" Marcus's voice thundered, raw and stripped of its practiced charm. Denise followed, her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting around the room like a thief already mid-act. I rose slowly, steadying myself against the chair. "Where is what?" I asked, my voice even. "The money," he shouted, pounding his fist against the table so hard the vase of crepe myrtle toppled over. Clara appeared in the doorway then, clutching her phone, her voice calm but firm. "I'm recording this," she announced, holding the device high so both could see. Denise sneered. "You think anyone will believe an old woman and her neighbor over her own son?" But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the fear beneath the bravado. They tore through my house like a storm tearing through a field, drawers pulled open, cabinets rattled, linens tossed to the floor. Marcus stormed into my bedroom, muttering curses, and moments later returned holding the decoy insurance envelope I had planted weeks before. His hands shook as he ripped it open, only to find pages of blurred photocopies. No figures, no fortune. His roar filled the room. "You're hiding it from us. Where did you put it?" Denise rifled through the pantry, pulling out the tin labeled funeral fund. She opened it with trembling hands, only to find nothing but stones wrapped in tissue paper. Her face crumpled with disbelief. "She's playing us," she whispered, turning to Marcus with panic. I stood there, spine straight, eyes locked on the boy I once cradled in my arms. "You sold my trust long ago," I said quietly, my voice cutting sharper than a scream. "Whatever you hoped to steal is gone, and all you've left behind is proof of who you truly are." Clara's phone recorded every second. The destruction of my belongings, the fury in Marcus's tone, the desperate clawing of Denise's hands through my cabinets. When Marcus lunged toward me, I stepped back, clutching the armrest of the chair, ready for the worst. But Clara's voice cut through the chaos like a bell. "Enough. Another step, and this goes straight to the police, to the papers, to every eye in this city." For a moment, silence fell heavy. Marcus's chest heaved, his fists trembling at his sides. Denise pulled at his arm, her voice shrill. "We can't do this here, not now." And slowly, like animals driven from prey, they backed toward the door. Before leaving, Marcus spat words that chilled the air. "You think you've won, Mama. You've made an enemy of your own blood." The door slammed behind them, and the house groaned under the weight of their rage. I sank into my chair then, Clara's hand steady on my shoulder. My heart hammered, but my mind was clear. They had shown their true faces without shame, and every word, every act of violence and desperation was captured. I whispered to Clara, more to myself than her. They wanted me to forget. Instead, I will remember everything, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the time had come to move from defense to justice. The next day dawned pale and heavy, the air thick with the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. I woke before the sun, the images of Marcus's fury still alive in my mind, but instead of trembling, I felt the strength of resolve. They had shown the world who they were. Now it was time for me to show the world who I still was. After breakfast, Clara and I gathered the pieces of evidence like sacred relics, the audio files copied onto flash drives, the videos of Marcus and Denise rummaging through my bedroom chest and pantry, the notes written in my hand across months of feigned confusion, and the little brown bottle of drops now sealed in a plastic bag with the date and hour clearly marked. Together, we carried it all to Patrice at the legal aid office, the rain beginning to drum against the car roof, as though the heavens themselves demanded justice. Patrice welcomed us into a modest office, lined with shelves of case files and framed certificates. She examined everything carefully, her eyes sharp, her fingers tapping the table each time a piece of proof fell into place. "You've done more than most people twice your age could manage," she said, her voice steady with admiration. "This is not just suspicion anymore. This is a timeline of deliberate abuse. With the bank manager's testimony, with Clara's recordings, with the chemical analysis from Dr. Sinclair, we can take this to the authorities." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "But Evelyn, I must ask, are you ready for what comes next? These are your own blood. Courtrooms can be cruel. Are you prepared to see them in handcuffs?" I closed my eyes for a long moment. Images of Harold's smile, of Marcus's first steps, of Denise holding his hand on their wedding day, flickered through my mind. But those images were ghosts now, replaced by the truth of their greed and the venom of their betrayal. When I opened my eyes, my voice was steady as stone. "I am prepared. They made me a victim in their minds. But in mine, I am still a mother, a worker, a woman who has survived too much to surrender. Let them face what they earned." Patrice nodded and began drafting the complaint. She spoke of protective orders, emergency motions to freeze unauthorized transactions, and criminal charges for administering harmful substances. Each word fell like a nail into the coffin of their scheme. Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening, and whispered, "Harold would be proud of you." I felt his presence then, not in sadness but in strength, as though the walls of the office carried his voice. "Stand tall, Evelyn. You have carried heavier burdens before." That afternoon, with rain still pounding the streets, Patrice accompanied me to the precinct downtown. The officer at the desk raised his brows as she laid out folders of evidence. He listened in silence as we explained the story from beginning to end, his pen moving across a thick pad of notes. When we finished, he looked at me with a seriousness that made the room feel colder. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you are one of the clearest witnesses I've ever heard. You've done half our job already. We'll need to bring them in for questioning, but with this kind of evidence, it won't be long before charges are filed." As we left the station, the storm clouds finally broke, releasing a downpour that washed the streets clean. I lifted my face to the rain, letting it soak into my hair, into the lines of my skin, and I felt a freedom I had not known in years. They had tried to cloud my mind, to steal my life, but instead they had sharpened my will. Now, justice was moving, slow and steady, like a river carving stone. And when it reached Marcus and Denise, there would be no turning it back. That night, Clara and I sat together in my kitchen once more. The house smelled of coffee and lemon pie, the same comforts Harold once loved. "Do you think they'll fight it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Of course they will. But they can't fight the truth forever." I placed my hand on the notebook that had become my shield and whispered, "The truth always remembers." The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings, statements, and signatures. Yet through it all I walked with my head held high. When Marcus and Denise were finally summoned, they arrived with the same arrogance that had fueled their scheme, but arrogance cannot hide from truth. The recordings spoke louder than any excuse. The videos showed hands rifling through drawers that were not theirs, and the analysis of those drops confirmed chemicals that had no business being swallowed by anyone. I watched them squirm in their seats as the evidence piled higher than their lies could reach. There was no more pretending, no more false smiles. They were not caretakers, they were predators. The court ordered protective measures, and the prosecutor assured me criminal charges would follow. But more than the legal victories, what stayed with me was the silence in that courtroom when the truth became undeniable. People shifted in their seats, some with pity, some with shame, but all of them knew an old woman had stood against betrayal and won. Clara squeezed my hand that day as though to say, "You've done it, Evelyn, you've carved your story into the world." And in that moment I realized this battle was never only about my money or my house. It was about proving that age does not erase strength, that betrayal cannot erase dignity, and that silence will never erase truth. Back home, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the breeze, its blossoms wide and fragrant, a reminder that life blooms again, even after storms. I walked through my quiet house, touching the photographs, the furniture Harold had built, the quilts I had stitched with calloused fingers, and I felt no weakness. I felt power, power not in wealth, but in endurance. My son had tried to write me off as a fading memory, yet here I stood, sharper and stronger than ever. He underestimated the resilience of a woman who had scrubbed floors, stitched clothes, and buried her loved ones but never surrendered her spirit. To those listening now, I say this: never doubt the strength that lives in you, no matter your age, no matter your scars. Evil can creep in dressed as family, as kindness, as concern, but truth will always reveal itself. Guard your heart, guard your mind, and above all, trust the voice inside you that whispers when something is wrong. That voice saved me, and it can save you too. If you have walked through betrayal, through storms of your own, I invite you to share your story here with this community. Your words may be the lantern someone else needs in their darkness. And if this story touched you, if it opened your eyes or gave you strength, I ask you to join us by subscribing to this channel. Together, we can build a circle of voices that are never silenced, of hearts that are never alone. Every story matters, and every lesson shapes the road ahead. So tell me in the comments, what did you feel, what did you learn, and what will you carry with you from this story? Subscribe, share your heart, and let's continue walking together, one story at a time. Because here, your voice is heard, your strength is honored, and your story will never be forgotten.